one calls me Donna. It was Donna at school, but then I like cut that off because people spell it 2 N's, and that was enough to sway me away.
Leave me alone.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
I'm so like I literally will point it out. So if a friend does it, I'm like, you know, that's not my name. Why are you spelling
Just doing it to piss you off.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Just to piss you off. So it's interesting actually because obviously me and Leonarda are from Kosovo, and our names, when you hear them, like you can tell like this person is definitely Albanian, but Donatella isn't a typically
my brother's
Albanian.
called Elvis.
Wow.
Yeah,
But I did know an Albanian boy in school called Elvis.
Yeah.
So maybe
Because
it's
it'd be like
maybe
Elvis.
it's a thing.
Elvis,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's definitely after Elvis Presley.
Yeah, definitely.
My parents did not know another Elvis. And then my brother actually was talking about communism. My brother was called Bricken, but they wanted to call him Brickel. But there was like this thing where like they legally weren't allowed to call him Brickel in Albania. I don't know why. I think someone else was called Brickel or something. There was a whole thing. So they had to just change the last letter to make it Bricken.
Wow.
I know, it's so bizarre. And I've never met another Bricken or Brickel. He was called Kenny, obviously.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, this is a brother who sadly passed away. And a lot of people, until he passed away and they saw his headstone, they didn't know his name was
His
Bricken.
real name, yeah.
Because they just thought he was called Kenny. No, because communism ended in 1992, and I was born in 1993.
Okay, yeah.
So like just a year after. And I was so detached from it because we moved to England in 1996. I was only 3 years old. And it was only when like a year or two ago, they were like, yeah, Albania was under communism. And I was like, what? Like my parents never spoke about it. But then I started putting 2 and 2 together because the way they explained work and life, like it just never made sense to me. I was like, what do you mean you had like a routine and you worked on these sort of fields and you did these specific jobs? And then I found out that we were under communism and I was like, oh, okay, now that makes sense. And my mum, one of my favourite stories is she said that when they moved over to the UK, even though it was 1996 and money in Albania had only just become a thing, she goes, they used to have cash. And she was like, we used to just go to the shop with cash. They would scan everything and then she'd just put her hand out and just hope that the cashier took the right amount because the concept of money was still so new to them.
Wow.
And they definitely got robbed.
And see, this is because we were saying in one of the previous episodes why these stories from the women who did live through communism and through the war in Kosovo are so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that would be lost on a lot of people having that insight that like just go into the shop and just hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Hoping for the best, hoping that the shopkeeper isn't robbing you.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because you don't know what it's like because it was taken from you for such a long time. Absolutely. And I'm wondering if not talking about what your parents experienced in Albania at the time was a bit like a trauma response.
Yeah. Exactly, for them. Yeah, because they didn't. Like I literally had no idea. And I think they moved over here and they tried like block it out because it was such a different period in their life.
Yeah.
And for the kids to not know, I think like that's such a huge thing. And to learn it third hand from someone else. And then for me to go back to my parents and be like, well, let's have another chat, shall we? Let's have a little talk.
Yeah.
They probably thought they were protecting you
Absolutely.
Exactly,
from that trauma and they could handle the trauma. And
Yeah. What I think is so funny about that as well is like Albanians will do that and then in the same breath want you to fill in government documents.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Do you know what? The amount of times I spent most of my childhood in and out of the local authority or the council, especially when, because a big part of my family on my dad's side came over as refugees during the war. And I was literally in the job centre with every single family member, filling out all of every single document. I was 10.
Yeah.
And my mum, her English was still like really broken and she hadn't, it was just, she didn't have time to learn English. She was raising 3 kids and then hosting her whole husband's family as refugees.
Yeah.
She didn't have time. And I remember sitting down with a family member and the lady in the job centre asked this particular family member to sign their name on the document, to print the name and sign it. And my family member turned around and said, I don't know how to write my name. And I was like, what? How do you not know what do you mean you don't know how to spell your name? Like, she was like, I don't know how to write my name. I don't even know what a signature is. And like, you think back to those times because our literally that generation of our parents and uncles and aunts, like they were starved and suffocated of everything, of school, of education, of their own language. Like they were not given that choice, that freedom.
Especially women as well, because in Albania it was like a known thing that as soon as you hit 12 you're out, you're working, you're not in school. And they would prioritise putting boys in school because they would be able to, well, it was a whole sexist thing, wasn't it? They would have more opportunity because of their freedom limit, to grow up and actually have potential better jobs. Whereas women, like out of school, I've still until about 2-3 years ago. I know cousins who were still taken out of school at 12, because also there's this whole arranged marriage thing as well, which is a whole nother thing. And I think, people were just not taught to read and write. Like my mum, I remember when we first came here, she used to have this big dictionary, and it was Albanian to English. And even our reading and writing Albanian was quite difficult for her. But I remember she used to like go into the book, and then she would see it written, and she would practice writing in English under it, just to basically educate herself. And that's what we had to do in those days. You just had to educate yourself, because where else were you going to go?
Exactly.
No,
and we say this quite a lot, that our communities back then in the mid to late 90s were so small. We didn't really have many Albanian or Kosovo people to turn to.
No.
Like it was just, you were pretty much on your own, and you were lucky if you found someone who spoke the same language as you, who understood your culture somewhere. And most of the time it was like in North London somewhere, like Wood Green or something. Like
Where the community is.
right. And it was just, I can't imagine how lonely it was. I mean, it's lonely for us now. Our generation, it's lonely, and I cannot imagine how lonely it was for our parents, and in particular for our mums.
Exactly. I mean, my mum had 5 kids. We're 5, and she had to raise all of us by herself. My dad was the one working. She, to this day, does not know how to read and write English. She knows how to read and write Albanian, but not English. And she will send me messages of how she would say the word and how she would spell it in Albanian, and she would spell it that way to try and do it in English.
To try and say it in English, because our languages, when I tell people there's 36 letters in our alphabet, they're like, what?
I know.
And
like,
we don't
listen,
have a W either.
No.
Yeah.
How do they say it? They say vim rapsta vim. Do you get like they?
So we say
make
Double V.
Yeah, W, like W. Yeah, we say W.
They would say the
So
German
literal.
way.
Yeah, so
just
literal.
the German way.
And it's important. Like sometimes when I tell people we've got 36 letters in our alphabet, the way we say things is completely different. It's like almost back to front if you were to say it in English.
Phrase.
Like the
Exactly.
translation, sometimes you just can't translate things
No, exactly.
into English. And so growing up, after moving to the UK, how much of the Albanian culture was actually in the family home for you and your parents and your siblings?
So much. I think I saw this thing recently which really resonated with me, and they call it a capsule culture. And it's where they say that people who leave their country hold on to their culture more than people in the country, because they feel this obligation to like upstand the basically standards. And then you go back to your own country and they're like, they moved on, and they're like, why are we still being so strict about things? It's just a madness. And so in our household, 100%, like absolutely everything. There was especially like the yearly stuff, how you keep your house, whose job it is to do what. Like my mum was definitely the housekeeper, even though she also worked. She was then had to go to work, had to raise the kids, had to do the housework, and that was just like the standard. And even now, like I'd say a little bit less, but until I was, let's say 3 moved to England, until I was about 15, 16, those standards stay the same. They never evolved. I was never allowed to go to friends' houses. I wasn't allowed to go to parties. Like, no, it's embarrassing. And it was all this whole element of embarrassing the family, and I think that is a big trigger for me personally. Like now, and I live by the standard of I don't care what anyone thinks, because it is about my happiness. As long as I'm a good person, that's all I need to know. And it was because we were always told to like hide our flaws, especially like amongst, like my mum would be like, so much because, well, you can't tell anyone this if something happens, and I'm there like, why?
Yeah, and
not that deep.
And it's funny because even when we were like kind of planning the podcast, we knew that we were going to come across a lot of women who weren't going to come forward because of that, exactly, because of the shame, because we were always told don't tell our secrets. And that my response to that is always, well, why did you do it in the first place? This is part of my story and part of my life, and it was actually really traumatizing for me. And if you didn't want people to talk about it, you should have done it in the first place.
Exactly.
You know, and I think that shame and that mara, like, genuinely has been the reason why women in our community have died, whether it's by femicide, whether it's by suicide, whether it's by domestic abuse, homicide. That is something that we are really, really passionate about breaking down, and we can't break that down without having these discussions, without talking about that. Actually, our parents did tell us, don't talk to anybody about our family life.
Yeah.
And especially if there was, you know, domestic abuse involved, it was, you do not tell anybody.
Yeah.
And even though family knew, like it was so obvious,
Yeah.
and no one spoke about
Yeah,
it. It was just like,
absolutely.
oh, that's like their thing, and it was always like and I always see this thing. It's like when they're like, don't talk about it, the only person you're protecting is the perpetrator.
the abuser,
you're
yeah.
literally only saving them or protecting them, and not the actual victims, which is mind blowing to me in its own aspect.
When you were growing up at school, what was that like for you? Because we have this, we say this all the time, that like it's like having two identities, because you have to be this this one person at home, and then you go to school with all of your English friends, and you feel like you have to be a completely different person there.
Exactly. And even though you were a completely different person, you're 100% right. Like you were this like innocent girl at home, and then you go to school and you're like, oh, actually, I've got a personality, like I've got an identity. But everyone in school also already knew the underlying thing, because the kids knew I couldn't go to the parties. The kids knew that I had strict parents, and they were, I think one great thing about growing up in London is they were very understanding, because other cultures were also in the same school, and they almost aligned in certain ways. So there was empathy and sympathy, which is a fantastic kind of barrier, which is why whenever people ask me, would I raise my kids in London or in Devon, I wouldn't even question it. I'm like, London all the way.
Absolutely. I've moved back to London because of that. I've moved back because I moved out to Surrey for a short while, actually for a bit of a long time. And I was like, I can't raise my child here. The lack of diversity, I have to go back to London.
Yeah. That's what happens when you are raised in an area that isn't as multicultural, is that you do get fed this stuff, or you see stuff on the internet, and then it's all about the way you view things, and it just is skewed massively when you're not surrounded by people from those cultures directly. And I feel so lucky every single day that I was raised the way I was in the schools I was. But yeah, there was definitely this element of being a different person at school and then being a different person at home.
Yeah, and I think that when we were growing up in the 90s here in the UK, or in specifically London, because I think a lot of us migrated to London first, there was no representation either, even though there were other communities, like there was Turkish communities, there was Greek communities, but they're still just, it felt impossible to try and find peers. And I mean, like I personally got to the point where I was like, I give up, I don't have any Kosovan or Albanian friends. Like this is it. All of my friends were English, and so I never had Albanian friends growing up.
This is why it makes me laugh when I get online. They're like, "Oh, you're so English," and I'm like, "Well, you're telling me that I'd been attacked because I evolved and adapted to the land that I was in by the people I was surrounded by. Like, what did you want me to do? Just be a lonely little elf on the shelf just by myself all day? Like, these people are gonna have an effect on you."
And I think it's really important, because I guess sometimes it feels like our identities and our culture is being erased because we are progressing, I don't know, assimilating, however you want to describe it. There is a big, massive progression happening in our generation, especially for women like us. I don't know about you, but I don't give a fuck. I know you don't care. No, Leah, I don't give a shit. Like I'm so over it.
Yes.
I am so bored of it. And that's why when we was having that chat earlier, I said, even discussing, you know, what your life is like now, I'm even bored of having that conversation. Like, what was it like telling your parents that your partner isn't Albanian? Like, it was actually the motivation behind why we get into these, I guess, desperate points in our lives where we literally risk our lives to tell our parents, like, actually, I'm never going to date an Albanian man.
Yeah. And that's it. And I think that was like my first stage, was that I needed to break that barrier. And I think a lot of women these days, and I've said it to so many, I get messages just being like, this is my boyfriend, he's from this background, how did you tell your parents? But I surpassed that step because I told them before I found someone. I knew from day dot that the traditional Albanian married life was not for me. And I needed to break the barrier of how can I tell them that I'm not going to be with an Albanian, rather than, oh, I'm going to be with a Spanish guy or an Italian guy. Like, basically say to them, hey, like, I actually don't think this is the future for me. I don't think it's right. Like, also, I'm not denying it. An Albanian man would not be happy with me. Okay? No. I'm saving the Albanian men.
Because there's the thing is because it's going back to that, the expectations of those gendered roles.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think the word of this podcast is dangerous, violent, misogynistic practices.
Yeah.
That is literally going to be the tagline of this podcast. And because those of us women who, I guess, dared to be, you know, to come forward and be like, no, that's not, actually, I refuse to live that life.
Exactly.
I refuse to live that life. And why we called this space Trime is because then we're like, oh my God, she's so Trimnish.
Yeah.
And actually, this is just basic
Yeah.
for women
Yeah.
to feel free and to do what it is that they want to do as long as they're safe.
Yeah, basic standards. And I think
Exactly.
all of us have someone in our family that we know has been a victim of domestic violence, has died from domestic violence, has committed suicide because of domestic violence or because of shame on the family. Like suicide from shame is the most bizarre two things that can be put together. Yet it does exist in our community.
It does.
And it's just not right. It's not okay.
And we don't talk about the issues that we have with mental health in our communities because it's seen as such a big taboo. And instead we're actually gaslighted. Like we're told like you're mental, you're crazy. Like we're not like because mental health because mental health is such a taboo in our culture. No one wants to talk about it. It's then actually used against women.
Yeah.
Like in fact, someone left this comment on my TikTok, right? I'm loving the comments on TikTok at the moment. I'm living for it. I told her
just watch them.
I don't argue with people online. I would just block and delete. But the comments are just like someone said, "Oh, yeah, but you're not a real Albanian. You're just a plastic Albanian." And okay.
It's so funny because it's actually the other way around. Like to be a real to come forward and be like, I am Albanian, these are my actual thoughts, is way more real than actually living behind a facade that you've been told to live behind.
Yeah.
That's a plastic Albanian.
Women in our culture and our communities are literally dying. They're being murdered or they're completing suicide because of misogyny, right? And you want to stick on the fact that I'm not a real Albanian. I'm plastic. I don't know. It blows my mind.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we get lost in progressing as a community because we're constantly trying to gaslight and shame women instead of actually offering them safe spaces to move forward.
And fantasizing this Albanian dream marriage. I'm married to an Albanian, but Lejla knows me.
He's really nice though.
He's
really nice.
And
apparently they exist.
My mission is to prove that they do
I'll be
exist.
damned.
Yeah, we've got this like theme. So her mission is to prove to me that there are nice out there.
And honestly, I think it's a very important topic because I think for me and you, like we are so like they don't exist.
They don't
Because
exist.
the majority have flaws and there's a minority that they do. But that's like finding one really
Really hard.
congratulations.
Yeah,
Really,
congratulations.
really congratulations. It's such a hard thing to do. But finding one is like, is it worth the risk of putting yourself out there? And I know loads. Like I've got a cousin who I remember she was so undercover dating her now husband, but he lived in Albania and then he lived in Germany, and she would take day trips. Like she would fly from London to Germany for the day to spend the day and come back. And I remember from the distance I was like, this isn't a good guy. I was like, no, it's weird. Like I don't think the vibe is right. And now she's married to him and he's actually ended up being one of the good ones. So it just shows you that you can have even someone like me who was like so strong-willed that even I can be wrong because and I'm happy to admit that. I think that's like another thing is Albanians don't admit that they're wrong.
No, my God, wrong. What? Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Yeah, exactly. Like,
and I think it's such a big thing to be able to put your hands up and be like, oh, actually, I was wrong. Because I would rather be happy for my cousin than to dwell and be like, oh, no, she like proved me wrong. Like, who am I?
No,
Happiness
absolutely.
comes first. Yeah,
exactly. I think Trime really, the number one thing for me is to break that fantasizing, the fantasy. That's what a lot of women are I see it every day, all day. I see it in my cousins. I see it in my siblings. I see it in fellow Albanian women that are not related to me. They fantasize this massive wedding, gold. I want my vire to do this. I want that. Bitch, be your own person. I don't get it. Just be your own person.
Let's progress, please. Like, of course, there's nothing wrong with, wanting to get married or however you choose to live your life. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But it's absolutely okay to be independent. Like, you don't have to live for other people.
We've got so much potential. We've got so much potential. So much access to education, whether it's here, Kosovo, Albania, wherever in the world. We've got access. Women are a bit more freer, but only if they break those shackles and if we bring more light to the core issues, domestic violence, all of this.
Absolutely. See, the thing is whilst I'm open to Leo, show me different, I'm also very much like, I don't know. Because how comes when we're actually having these discussions, the comments in the comment section are, instead of coming forward as an
Yeah.
ally
Yeah.
and be like, you know what, you're right.
Yeah.
We do have a really high rate of domestic abuse in
Yeah.
our, and in fact,
Yeah.
so in a study was conducted in Albania, in Shqipni, and that 1 in 2 women are victims of domestic abuse and violence, as opposed to 1 in 4 for the rest of Europe.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
It shows,
Double.
right? How
Yeah.
much? Yeah.
The disparity in the statistics, right?
And then they try and say, oh, but it happens everywhere. But
Yeah.
you look at statistics and you're like,
Yeah.
it's happened twice as much.
This is my
Yeah.
point.
Albania.
Right, this is my point. And it's, you know, instead of coming forward and being like, I actually really want to do something to help.
Yeah.
Like, instead of me crying my male tears and my fragile male ego being hurt, what can I do to help?
Yeah.
So we don't need the comments that tell me I'm a plastic Albanian or
Yeah.
tell you whatever you tell you, you're not a real Albanian because you're not married to an Albanian man, or you're not
Yeah.
married at all. I saw that TikTok about you, the wedding thing that made me
Yeah.
laugh so
Yeah.
much. And again, it goes back to that fantasy that
Yeah.
maybe it's not even just our culture. It's
Yeah.
it's almost everywhere in the world that
Yeah.
the only thing a woman should strive to be is
It's
married.
Yeah.
Oh, God forbid.
Which is no.
No.
That is not an achievement.
So the layers of, I guess, like being a woman just in general, but then of having to break the cycle, of having
Yeah.
to say, you know, I'm not going to date an Albanian man. I'm going to date whoever I choose to date.
Yeah.
Actually, because I did the same thing. But what that was like for you in terms of your mental health and what the motivation was behind you
Yeah.
at such a young age, coming forward and saying that to your parents.
I think one of the most common questions I get asked online is like, people are like, why do you speak negatively about Albania? And it's really funny because it's also, they say Albania like I'm talking bad about the land.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the land, it's the people. But I always say it was because of the, like, I grew up and when I hit 15, I saw my future. Like, I remember when I was in my early teens, I was told by a family member that I didn't belong to our family, I belonged to my future husband's family. I was about 10 or 11. Like, that is a young age to be told that information. So now I've had this seed planted in my head. Now the teens roll in, you know, I start to grow, I start to develop.
Yeah.
And I reach 15 and I'm like, oh, damn, like I'm close to marrying age. And then that's when the real fear kicked in. And because I had so little control in my life, I couldn't go out to see my friends. But now I'm 15 right now. I've seen the kids around me, the westernized kids or other kids who get this freedom. And I think, how comes I don't have this? So I then start searching for what I can control in my life. Enter eating disorder. So I became bulimic because I was like, oh, I can control what food stays in my system. Now listening to that word, that sentence is so effed up because it's like, that's like, how did I get from A to B? But at that time, when you have no other path, that was the only way I could find control. So became bulimic at 15. Then 16 and a half, I realized that now it's an addiction. I can't stop if I wanted to. And mental health for me has always been like an underlying thing. And I didn't know how powerful it was within my mind until I became in my 20s. But at 16 and a half, 17, I turned to myself and I said, oh, like this is actually a really bad addiction I have. I need help. And we're rolling back to the mental health side, right? Family don't understand this. So I go to the GP and I say, I'm bulimic. They send me. See, the thing is, when you're bulimic, the traditional path is wait.
Yeah.
They had never come across a situation like me where it was all psychological.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so they send me into therapy, right? Because also, if you're going to go into therapy, amongst anyone who's watching and has any views on it, therapy does not work unless you want it to work.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
absolutely.
People force you into therapy and
Absolutely.
you are not ready, it will not work.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But I'd reached that point, I wanted it to work. And I got to a point where I was trying to get over this bulimia. I was in Albania and a situation happened where we went to a relative's house and I got up and danced, but it wasn't my direct relative, it was a relative of a relative, right? And I supposedly wasn't allowed to do that. So on the way home, I get scolded. This triggers the most bizarre reaction to me where I'm like, I'm lost. I don't like the life I'm living. I don't like my future. And I reached a point where I was like, I don't want to live. I'm done. I'm over it. I'm out. I'm signing off. I'm done. And I then started having bad, suicidal thoughts. And I think that was the triggering point where I was like, oh, okay, like I am going to either leave this earth because I don't like my life and I don't like the way it's going, or I have to take the ultimate risk and go to my parents and lay down what my thoughts are, how I feel, and also tell them that I was having those thoughts. Because I thought, are my parents going to love me enough that they will turn their back on our culture to make sure that their daughter is still here, basically?
Yeah.
Such a dark topic. And I was very, very lucky because I know not all families are like this, but my parents did what I ultimately hoped that they would. And they basically turned around. They were like, our daughter is our daughter, and we love her beyond any culture that we're part of. And so now, the triggering point was they came to one of my therapy sessions, and it's really hard to sit down at home in the environment where you've had all these cultural restrictions and have that conversation.
I can't even. I'm sweating. I've literally just, you said that and I'm sweating at the thought of it.
It's so bad. So we weren't in that environment. We were in a counsellor's office, and I broke down. They broke down, and it was a really connecting, beautiful moment despite what the situation was. And it connected us all because I think for the first time ever, they saw what mental health was in that very second.
Yeah.
And so now one of the most powerful things, and one thing that makes me so proud of my parents, I cannot speak highly enough of my parents. I love them with all my heart, and they love me with all their heart. My dad or my mum will now turn around, and because they go to my dad, right? It's the male thing. They'll go to my dad, my dad will just turn around point blank and be like, it's my daughter and it's her life.
Yeah.
What can they say to that?
Yeah.
Because they want a reaction from him, right? They want to embarrass him. They want to like make him feel bad.
And they want to tie the worth to you.
Exactly.
That it's because of you, and you're the one who shamed the family name, the honor. Like it's still tied back to the girl or the woman.
Always, exactly. We can't escape it. And now that he says that and they can't say anything in return, it is so bizarre to me because in my family, even amongst like the ones who are still so judgy, which by the way, I'm under no illusion that they will be nice to my face, but as soon as they go home,
you know.
Snakes.
And then in the end, it's Mummy was my fault.
Honesty, sad. Literally, it's my favourite line. They'll be like, bonus sans.
Mummy was my fault.
And so like, but they are kind to me, and they're kind to my partner, and they're kind to my kids because my parents have stood behind me.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the time for Albanian parents out there who might be watching this, if you are, well done. I'm really happy that you're here. But your children's biggest supporter is you. Right? And as long as you stand by them, your family really can't say anything to your face. Yeah, they can talk behind your back, but that's a global thing. Everyone talks.
Yeah.
And I, as someone who has supportive parents, I can't explain how grateful I am every single day of them. Like so grateful. And my kids are their absolute pride and joy. And you have to surpass cultural expectations to get to harmony within a family. You have to. That's the only way to do it. Your family is your family. It works the way it does for you. And no set of guidelines or rules is going to give you that dream. Like you were saying, that ultimate family life that people think it doesn't exist. It's like that kind might work for a few, but it doesn't work for the many. And you're pushing the many to try and do it, and it's falling apart. You've got domestic abuse, you've got cheating, you've got so many things, illegitimate children, and with other people, and that only happens because you followed the path of least resistance that you were told was the path of least resistance.
Absolutely. And again, most of the time that path of least resistance is followed because of fear. And so when you're saying yes to things and it's not an informed decision and it's out of fear, that's not a real yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting, like everything you're saying, like I couldn't agree more, and I'm like yes.
Nodding.
Because,
me and Lejla gonna
because one thing that I was really thinking about, like having you on this podcast and speaking about your story is obviously I've had similar experience in terms of not dating in the culture at all, is that would you rather your daughter is alive and happy because she gets to date who makes her happy, or would you rather that your daughter is dead because she felt like the only way out was to complete suicide? Because her mental health was so bad and you were not there to support that.
Exactly. And these are people that you birth, these are kids that you show. And what I find so interesting is when kids are young, Albanians are fantastic. Like,
oh my god,
good.
Like children, like we love them and we protect them. And when I went to Albania, I went to Dors for a few days with my daughter. Oh my gosh, she was like a little local celebrity. And I could see the way that, you go to a restaurant and kids are allowed to be free and run around. You'd never get that in England. No. And these are like really nice, like posh restaurants. And the kids like skating around, laughing, joking. They've got playpens for the kids. You would never get that here.
That's so true. They have play places all over restaurants in Albania. I love that. It's such a fantastic...
Like we really hold children in such high regard and then we fuck them up.
Yeah, as soon as puberty hits.
Yeah, as soon as
Yeah.
puberty hits, the girls in particular,
Yeah.
it's like, hi, Detash.
Yeah.
Like, what? Yeah.
I know, like, it's conditioned, isn't it? That is pure conditioning. And it's why when people are like, oh, you always speak about the negative, blah, blah, blah. So when I speak about the positive, like, my number one thing is like the way we see kids and the way we protect kids and the way we give kids the time and day, which I think like some cultures, like in England, like they're very good with kids, but kids are kids, right? Kids are on the side, kids to play.
Yeah.
Whereas like, I remember vividly going to my uncle's house or going to my cousin's house, and the adults would be like having proper conversations with me, like actually giving me the time of day to speak to me, to make me feel seen and heard. And yeah, you're right. As soon as, and you wonder like what happens when you reach 12 or 13 and that's suddenly like it's a shift. It's a massive
Well, yeah, because there's that massive over-sexualization of girls in our community. It
Massively.
absolutely is. It's like, that's it. Your body's developed now. Your hormones are changing. All of a sudden, you're ready to be owned by a man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is owned. Like that
Yeah,
is it.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
being told
you're-
that I don't
yeah.
belong to my family and belong to someone else's family.
Yeah.
Like, how is that not going to make me feel like I'm being sold?
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's also like, we cannot progress and we will not progress without highlighting the really dangerous parts of the practices that we hold from generations ago. And I think a lot of people in our community are really scared. They're scared to bring these things to light. And I'm so grateful to be sitting here with you two,
Same.
knowing that actually that we might be a little bit scared. Of course, it's always going to be a little bit scary to do these
course.
things, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's
Yeah.
actually just like such an honor to be amongst women who are just like at the forefront, like, I don't give a flying fuck. I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Exactly.
I'm going to do it anyway.
Crazy enough. But
För det mig är kontrant.
But we're
Exactly.
living proof. We're living proof of, yes, we might have been scared.
Yeah.
I was scared. My mum started speaking about marriage when I was 17. And I got engaged at 20 to my husband.
Yeah.
You'll see this, but I met my husband on Monday. I got engaged on Friday.
It's almost as fast as lesbians. We move fast, but girl, you've got me there.
And it wasn't him, it was me. I was like, I do not have time to bullshit around.
Time be ticking.
Do you want to is this for serious or not? Because if it's not for serious, I haven't got time. And then I got married at 23, but it was always the yeshku tebure. And my husband's like, no, you are your own person.
I love that. I love it.
You know?
My cousins are still single. Could you send some more? Is he your brother?
He has, but his brother is complete opposite to him.
Oh, is he? Oh, damn it.
But he's just such a, and I say to people as a joke, I trained him, but it's not I trained him. It's I set expectations.
Yeah.
These are my expectations. This is what I don't want you to do.
Yeah.
I've got my own career. You will not get involved.
Yeah.
I've got my own land. You will not get involved.
Yeah.
I buy something. You are not going on the deed. It's as simple as that. Because I've said to him, you're my husband and I will trust you to the day I die, but I will never trust you in business because business is business.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
I think Albanian women are good with businessmen. I don't know
we're
what it is, but
yeah,
we're like,
we
there's
are.
something
We're
about
amazing.
Oh,
Yeah.
honestly,
You know that? We're fantastic.
Yeah.
and I feel like they're holding us back.
This is why we are doing
Exactly.
this, why we are creating the space and on this podcast, because we are phenomenal. Like, we have been leaders from the beginning of time, but we do not get our time to shine. And it's time now. Like, I'm so I'm so bored. I'm so bored. I'm so bored of having the same conversations. Like, let's move on. Let's actually
Talk about achievements.
yeah,
Let's talk about-
absolutely. All the success. Like, let's allow our women to thrive.
I mean,
absolutely.
our president is a woman. And that is a massive achievement
Yeah.
in itself, even though they still write articles about her weight and hello.
Yeah, I know.
But
it's just kind of
It's just,
stupid.
and it's
amazing.
because I'm so glad that you touched on. Thank you for sharing the part about the bulimia, because of brainwashed into this toxic diet culture that Albanians suffer from. Like, you cannot be fat. You can't even have an ounce of fat on your body.
Honestly, it's madness.
Yeah, and it's creating all of these eating disorders. And I know, like, your experience was different as to how the eating disorder came around, but these are real issues that are affecting women.
What I always hear stories about people Albanian women who are raised outside of Albania, and then when they go back for holidays, weight is always brought up. Oh, paske shtua do pesha.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? You put on weight? Like, how? I've not seen you in a year. It's great to see you too.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
How was that experience? Why are you talking about my weight?
Exactly.
No, I remember actually being really young, and it was just after the war. We went back for a family wedding, and I was 10, 11, God, it's such a long 35 now, so it's a long time ago. And I was running around with the other kids, and I was a little bit taller than the other kids, maybe a bit more broad shoulders. So I'm running around with the other kids, and I remember one of the women in the wedding being like, "Why are you running around sipir like a cow? Yeah, like why are you running around? Look, you're a big girl, like you can't be running around with the children." I was like, I'm 10.
Same age.
Leave me alone.
Honestly.
I'm 10, but these messages were put into our heads from like childhood as girls.
Exactly. And that's it. They just plant a seed and that seed grows. And then when you come with the problems, they're like, "Oh, how did you get these problems?" I'm like, you! You're the reason.
Born as Sam's
Thank you. Actually.
And then the gaslighting that happens back is like, nothing happened in your childhood. What are you talking about?
You had a gorgeous childhood.
Yeah. And like, didn't you
didn't
live in the
know
same
that.
house? Like, are we all like, what?
Suppressing some memories on purpose.
Yeah, and I do think that, and I completely understand that actually us coming forward and sharing these experiences of our childhood is probably quite scary for our parents because they now have to face and acknowledge and be held accountable. And whilst I know most of our parents were just in pure survival mode,
100%.
you know, escaping communism, escaping genocide, right? It had this really traumatic effect on us.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly.
And I just add, our parents, because my parents tell me how they were raised, and it's unfortunate that they were never taught emotional intelligence by their own parents. And it was always, you're in the carton, you are 10, 12, 13 years old, you're taken out of school. The men specifically, you have to work. And so it's a generational thing, and it's now up to us to break that.
To break it, exactly. And we are the generation to break it. And I think we should also, and I can say this very easily because my parents have accepted my lifestyle, and I give them so much space to forgive them for things. And I always look back and I think, like, someone said something recently, and it's like when you reach a point of adulthood where you're no longer, when you judge someone, you don't judge them. Instead, you sit down and you're like, what happened in their childhood?
Tell me about your childhood trauma.
So I always think, like, my parents, like, they did what they thought was right? And I think the tipping point is, how do they react when things need to change, right? Because you can say, okay, fair enough, you're raised the way you were, that's why you raised us that way. But now I'm saying it's time that we evolve a little bit, and it's how they react at that point. Because if they evolve with you, like my parents are known to be one of the most evolved in our family, and we have a huge family, and they're looked up to so much by the adults as well for giving that freedom, but also so much by the younger generation, because they're like, they'll turn to their parents and they'll be like, oh, look at so-and-so, like they're look what they've done. And it gives, my parents have now given other parents leeways to do the same. So it kind of is like, as much as we are setting the path, if they can join us, they're setting the path for the older generation.
That's fantastic. Like, hearing you say that, like, fills me with so much hope. It really does, because one of the things that I was actually going to ask you is, what changes have you witnessed, have you experienced? And that, just you saying that is just, I don't know, that does fill me with hope that actually what we're doing here is the right thing, and that the older generation, like our parents and grandparents, well, maybe, you know, that like actually our mums and aunts will listen to this, and hopefully they will connect. And it might be quite hard for them to accept it at first, but really this is about actually opening that space and creating that healing generationally now, because it's okay. Yes, there were times we fucked up. We really did fuck up, but it's okay. Like, it's okay to be honest about it. Put your hands up and say, yes, let's change. Let's move forward. And what you just said there's just so beautiful is how people react when they're faced with change.
Exactly. And I was fortunate, and I don't like, because they're like, oh, you were lucky, and people say you're lucky, and it is, to a certain extent, it is luck. But my parents, I mean, the way they've changed now is like madness. The way they see people get in with other people. Like my mum, I know she was joking, but well, to a certain extent, but she goes, now that I've with Dan, and you know, we've got other people with other people, she always goes, Djalat me martua me shqiptar. So she's like, your sons you marry with Albanians, but your daughters you marry with foreigners.
I love that. So which Albanian women are marrying the Albanian men then?
And it's like, but also like, no, the Albanian men don't get scolded when they get with other people.
No, absolutely. Oh my God, like in my family, so many of my uncles dated and had children with women who were not Albanian, and they were never scolded for it. No, they were never scolded for it. My experience of coming, I guess I had to come out twice to my family, but my experience was so different. Like, it's so nice to hear. Like, it might have been really tough, and I'm not taking away from that, because it is so hard, but it's nice to know that actually it was as smoothly as it possibly could have been, because the reality is so many women are putting themselves at risk of honour-based abuse and violence when they are coming forward and saying, I'm not going to date an Albanian man. I'm not. And it's really nice to know that there are elders in the community who are willing to actually accept this change.
And it's not all about just like shitting on one side of it, because I've got cousins who have got the option to either be with an Albanian or not, and they still have their mindset that they will be with an Albanian. So I don't want anyone watching this to be like, oh, we're advocating that
propaganda.
Every Albanian. That's why I'm so glad that you're here, because otherwise it would just be me.
Propaganda.
The amount of hate you guys would have received.
Honestly, I think like the end goal and what we want here is create a community that goes, be with who you want to be. If it's an Albanian, be with an Albanian. If it's not an Albanian, then it's not an Albanian.
Absolutely.
As long as you are happy.
Be free.
Be free.
Everyone has preferences. I had a preference for myself to be with an Albanian, but because we've discussed this obviously, and we live in, and you know, I said this to Lejla, in my household with my husband, we pick and choose what we will have in our household. A lot of it will be religion based, because I follow the religion. I follow the religion more closely because it gives me more freedom than an Albanian woman. In our culture, it's not a lot of freedom, and I know for a fact my kids will just not follow the culture. They just won't, because you give them this sense of freedom, of preferences, and you know, if they marry Lebanese,
they marry. It's so
just
funny
call me at the wedding.
Just call me at the wedding,
because their wedding was so good. That's literally why. That's literally why.
I love it. I just found it so fascinating, because to talk from a religious point. So I mean, and I don't speak about this too much online, but I do say that I'm not religious. So I was raised Catholic, which obviously in the Albanian or just in Albania, that was the minority. It was mostly a Muslim country, minority of like some Christians, some Catholic. And it's so funny because me and my partner are not religious in the slightest. But in our household, we're very much, you learn about every religion, you pick if you want to be religious.
Exactly.
My son, my oldest son, he's religious. He goes, do you, but he sat us down the other day, goes, do you believe in God? And I was like, me and Daddy don't believe in God. And he was like, well, I believe in God. And I was like, yeah, that's absolutely fine. If you want to believe in God. And he goes, you know, God created everything. And I think it's such a powerful thing to give that space, because actually, if you'd sat my mum and dad down and said that if you didn't raise your kids without a religion, they wouldn't be religious. But look at my son now, like we're not religious and he is. And it's so powerful to see how kids can actually come into their own and make their own mindsets about things. And I find it so fascinating. And me and Dan always joke about the fact that we're like, well, obviously our kids are half English, half Albanian, so they can, you know, go with whoever they want. But we're very much happy with the idea if they wanted to go with an Albanian, they can. And the thing that I'm in charge of, right, is I'm raising these boys. Boys being the prominent title here. And it is my job to teach them that women's rights are just important as male rights. In our household, my oldest son knows what a period is, because this is across all cultures. What is it with like hiding?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Exactly.
It's so like you wouldn't be here without,
you know what? Absolutely. And a lot of that is because we're not educating the community, because it's not a child's responsibility to keep themselves safe, but we're not educating the community, like even what to call your body parts.
Exactly.
And in fact, my daughter knows all about periods. She's known from really young. And one day she said, actually, Mum, I don't want to call it that, because that's not what it's called. It's called a vagina, and I'm just going to call it that. And I was like,
good for her.
Love it.
Yes, girl.
Good for her.
Yes, girl. And I give a lot of freedom to my child in my household, because I know what it was like to grow up with absolutely zero freedom, to grow up in terror and then actually become a victim of violence further on in my adult years. And I don't want that for my daughter. Like, I want to have this really open relationship with her so that she gains that emotional intelligence. Like, she'll tell, like, if I'm comforting her, if my girlfriend's comforting her, she'll tell us, like, and we try and give her like advice or wise words. She goes, I don't need words right now. I just need a hug. Yeah, like, could you imagine saying that to your parents?
No. They'd be like,
what?
I will give you something.
What? Yeah,
I'll give you exactly what you need.
And even like once, Bella, when she was at my parents', because again, those gendered roles, my mum works, cooks, cleans, raised kids, she did it all, right? And my daughter has witnessed the complete opposite. Her mum's this intersectional feminist who's a lesbian. Like, our lifestyles complete opposite, right? Giving my parents a complete aneurysm. And and so one time she turned to my dad and she said, Granddad, why does Nana do all of the cooking, all of the cleaning, and she goes to work, and you just sit at the computer?
put him in a spot.
My
quickly.
daughter is like everything that I wish I was.
Yeah.
She's everything that I wish I
Well, that must
was.
heal your inner
Oh my
child,
God,
right?
so much. Like sometimes my mum will call me and she'll tell me, because she knows what I'm like with my daughter. She knows that Bella has so much freedom.
Yeah.
And she'll be like, Shishikam, I'm just telling you that this happened, and she told your dad this, and this. And I'm like, good,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad she did, because that's what it's like to stand up
Yeah.
for yourself and
Exactly.
not to just take everything that adults tell you. And as much as we love kids in our culture, we also just teach them, you do exactly what your parents tell you to do or what adults tell you to do.
But do you think we wouldn't be able to give our kids, this is such a backwards thing to think about, but do you think we wouldn't be able to give our kids this space if we didn't go through the trauma? So like everyone who meets my son, my oldest, they're like, he's so emotionally intelligent. It's because I go above and beyond to not hide topics, to talk to him about how important feelings are, what's right and what's wrong, and how to tell what, like, just to be a good person and everything like that. And so they meet him and they're like, wow, like he's so emotionally intelligent. But do we probably go above and beyond to make sure that they are as comfortable as they can be with their own emotions and their own thought process? And that maybe was only given to them through our trauma experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on a point about kind of like healing your inner child. I live vicariously through Bella. I live vicariously. Like, I see her have fun. I'm going to get emotional now. My God, is there going to be one episode where I don't cry? One. All I ask is just one episode where I don't cry.
No, but it's a real feeling.
Yeah, it is. And I guess, like,
don't
I've
hide
never
it.
had this space before. As much as like this was something that I dreamed of doing, it was because I desperately needed it.
Yeah.
Like, and I knew that other women in our community desperately needed it too.
Exactly.
But yeah, absolutely. Like, teaching my daughter all of these things about her emotions, about what anxiety is. She's known what anxiety is from when she was really little. And she now has the option to talk to me about her feelings. She has the options to say, you know what, Mum, I just need space.
Yeah.
I just need 5 minutes. I just need quiet time. Like, you could have never said that to your parents growing up.
No.
That was,
You could have never said that to her. And I was watching her have fun. As I said, like, we went to Dorset and then we went to Kosovo as well in June. And I was just watching her have fun and just enjoy. And I thought, these are the streets that I've roamed 1,000 times over, but never had fun in.
Yeah.
Really.
Exactly. And to live vicariously through them, I think is such a beautiful thing. And I think being an adult and seeing that and knowing that it's healing your inner child is so important. I think rather than being jealous, right? Because there's a strong aspect of jealousy that could be with it. And I think there's a very fine line between the two. And to see it for what it is, which is just living through your children and being happy that they are happy, they have the freedom that you didn't have, is such a magical thing. So yeah, if there is anyone out there who does have a look at someone else and think, or like, especially if it's your child, and you think like, how comes they get to have it? It's because of you. You are the person. Be proud that you've given them this space to be this free, and you deserve to enjoy it as much as they're enjoying it.
Absolutely.
It's so beautiful.
Absolutely. And something that I want to really like end this episode on is there are going to be so many women out there that are in similar situations that we were in, and they're going to think, I'm alone. I've got no one else out there. No one's like me. It's not true.
No.
It's not true.
No.
But it's not true. No. You are not alone. Like, and you don't have to be alone. We are here.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted to bring you on here, like, and why you're so passionate about it, because we know what it was like to be alone.
Yeah. Exactly.
And yes, it's not easy. It's definitely not an easy thing to experience and to have to be subjected to, but we are here. And now this community is here, and you can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't have much hope. I don't have this hopeful story to give, and I'm so glad that you've come on and you do have this hopeful story to give.
I'm so glad to be able to be given the space to do it as well. And I think it's always been my number one topic. And like I said, like, I get less and less backlash now the more I talk about it. And I think because a lot of the Albanian community that my videos are going towards, like, they are going to the right people, which I think is amazing.
Absolutely.
Like, I get hundreds and hundreds of Instagram messages just being like, complete. And when it heals me when these people message me and they say, like, I'm in support with you, because a lot of the time when I first started speaking about it, I knew I was going to get backlash, but I didn't know, I never anticipated that I was going to get so much support and so much love from it as well. And in return, they always say that they are so grateful of me to be able to put my face out there and say, hey, like, these are my issues that I've had, and I know I'm not the only one, and this is how I dealt with it, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Absolutely. I promise you. And that light is so bright. And my life now, like, I can't imagine what life would have been if that decision I had at 17 had gone through. Like, look at me now, and there is space for everyone in the Albanian female community, and we are all here, and we are all doing this together.
Absolutely. Thank you for being a part of it.
Right,
and in fact, a big part of what Trime is having that motor is
Yeah.
having that sisterhood,
Yeah.
because a lot of us didn't have that growing up, whether it was because you were the eldest daughter and you had to look after everyone else, or you were the only daughter and it was just such a lonely existence.
Yeah.
But we're here now.
Yes.
And we're here to stay, and we're not going
Exactly.
anywhere.
Can't get rid of us.
You can't get rid of us. Definitely not that easy anyway. Thank you for trusting us.
No,
And thank you for being our first guest. I've got goosebumps.
I
Look,
love it.
I've got goosebumps because I envision this being so much bigger than all of us here.
Yeah.
And knowing that you are our first guest is such an honour. So
thank
thank
you.
you for trusting us.
No, thank
Yes.
you, thank you. I had so many people send it to me, and then when I shared your story yesterday, I had a bunch of people messaging and being like, "Oh my god, when I saw it, like," people sent it to me, and they're like, "Yeah, you did it," and a bunch of other people being like, "Oh my god, I was really hoping that you were going to do it." So no, I'm so grateful
It's
to have been
amazing.
able, and I'm so happy that I messaged you and reached
Yeah,
out to you about
honestly,
it.
thank
So
you.
thank you guys.
Thank
It's
you.
been so lovely.